It begins with something ordinary, so ordinary that most people never think twice about it. A knock at the door, a brief exchange of money or a receipt, and a warm meal placed into waiting hands. For millions of people, food delivery is routine. It is comfort. It is convenience. Yet routine is often the perfect mask for horror. What if the face at your door carried more than a bag of food? What if that smiling stranger, or the shadow lurking just beyond the porch light, was something that carried danger instead of comfort? There is a saying whispered among delivery workers, a saying not often repeated to customers. The worst houses are not the abandoned ones. The worst houses are the ones that look normal. It lingers like an omen, a warning that what waits inside familiar walls may not be familiar at all. When the night falls and drivers step from the safety of their cars into dimly lit neighborhoods, they enter someone else's world. A stranger's house, a stranger's rules, and sometimes a stranger's secrets. Imagine the silence of a suburban street at midnight. Streetlights burn dim, flickering under the hum of electricity. The air is still, heavy, and carries only the faint rustle of leaves or the distant bark of a dog. A driver pulls up to a house at the edge of town, a place they have never been before, though the map insists the address exists. The porch light is on. The windows are lit. It looks safe. It looks ordinary. They step from the car, holding a bag that smells of fried food, the warm scent rising into the cool air. Each footstep crunches against gravel as the driver approaches the door. The neighborhood feels empty. Too empty, like every resident has vanished at once. The driver hesitates, knocks, and waits. The seconds stretch longer than they should. The bag of food feels heavier. The air grows colder. The light above the door buzzes faintly, casting shadows that move in ways they should not. And then the sound comes. The slow creak of the door opening on its own. Inside, the house is dark, though the windows outside glowed with light just moments before. The smell of food clashes with the smell of something damp and rotten that seeps out from within. There is no voice, no greeting, only silence. The driver calls out, a shaky hello that disappears into the hollow rooms. Their hand trembles slightly as they place the bag down, hoping someone will step forward, but no one does. And as they turn back to their car, they feel it. The heavy sensation of being watched, followed, studied from the unseen corners of the house. This is how many stories begin. A simple order, a simple delivery, but an ending that no one expected. The headlines that followed spoke of missing workers. Families said their loved ones had gone out to deliver food and never returned. Neighbors reported seeing delivery cars left idling outside silent houses, headlights still on, doors left wide open. Bags of food grew cold on porches where no one claimed them. And inside the houses, sometimes nothing at all. Sometimes signs of a struggle, and sometimes something far worse. There is one story that tells of a driver whose car was discovered on the edge of a forest, the keys still in the ignition. The order had been placed from a cabin that did not appear on official maps, though locals swore it had been there for decades. The food sat untouched on the steps, and the driver's phone was found just inside the threshold, still recording. When investigators played the audio, they heard only the creak of the cabin door, followed by hurried footsteps, a sharp intake of breath, and then silence. A silence that lasted until the recording ended on its own. The danger works both ways. Drivers are not the only ones who vanish. Customers, too, have disappeared after answering a knock at their door. In some cases, the food never even reached them. The driver arrived, they opened the door, and what happened in that small, fleeting moment left only questions. Friends and relatives claimed the homes were normal, the families happy. Yet something about that knock had opened the way to tragedy. Think of how fragile the trust is in these encounters. You order food expecting warmth and satisfaction, never once doubting the stranger who will carry it to your door. You unlock the door. You step into the porch light. You open yourself to whoever stands there. Most of the time, it ends with a simple exchange, a thank you, a receipt signed, a smile forced in the dark. But not always. Sometimes that knock becomes the sound that shatters a family, the sound that rewrites a town's history, the sound that echoes long after the meal has grown cold. What is most unsettling is that these stories are not legends whispered around campfires. They are documented cases, fragments of police reports, missing person flyers, and news clippings that quickly fade from headlines. The families never forget, though. They never stop replaying the last phone call, the last text message, the last moment of routine before it became nightmare. The very thought that something so ordinary can turn so violently wrong is what keeps people awake at night. So tonight, as you sit in your home, door locked, waiting for your food to arrive, ask yourself, who is really behind the knock? Do you know their face? Do you know their story? Or are you about to let something far darker step across your threshold? The world has always placed a strange kind of trust in the exchange of food. To accept a meal from another hand is one of the oldest human rituals, a silent pact between the giver and the receiver. In ancient times, travelers carried offerings of bread and water to prove they came in peace, because to eat from another's fire was to place your life in their care. That ritual remains alive today, but it has been reshaped by speed, convenience, and a quiet reliance on strangers we never truly meet. In cities, suburbs, and towns across the world, food delivery has become not only normal but essential. It is a lifeline for the lonely, for the overworked, for those who crave warmth in the silence of night. Yet every ritual, no matter how familiar, carries a hidden shadow. Consider the rise of late-night deliveries in the last few decades. Once restaurants closed their doors with the setting of the sun. Neighborhoods went still. Darkness meant rest. But modern life pushed against that rhythm, and soon the glow of screens and the hum of phones created a world that did not sleep. With this came a new kind of service. Men and women driving through the night, entering unknown streets, carrying food to doors that waited in silence. At first, it was seen as harmless convenience. Then came the quiet warnings. Communities whispered of drivers who vanished on routes that should have been safe. Entire towns spoke of certain addresses that delivery workers avoided, though no one could ever prove what had happened there. Stories passed between workers late at night in empty parking lots, where steaming coffee and paper cups did little to chase away the chill. They spoke of houses that seemed alive, of customers who never showed their faces, of orders that came from places no map ever recorded. The unsettling truth is that food delivery has always existed in liminal spaces. In the fragile threshold between public and private life, a driver is invited to a stranger's home yet remains an outsider, standing at the edge of another's world. They see things in fragments, a dim hallway, a face half lit by a porch light, the smell of something strange drifting from the open door. And in those fragments, unease grows, because every stranger could be harmless, but they could also be something far worse. Not all of these stories are urban legends. Newspaper clippings from small towns decades ago describe drivers found in fields, their cars still running, food spilled across the ground as though dropped mid-step. Police reports detail houses where orders were placed, but no resident was ever recorded as living there. In some regions, families still tell of the doorway disappearances when food was delivered, but neither driver nor customer was ever seen again. The paper trails end abruptly, as if someone or something erased them. The pattern is eerily consistent across locations and eras. The deliveries are almost always late at night, almost always to homes on the outskirts of town or on roads swallowed by forest. The customers, if described at all, are vague. A shadowy figure, a voice that sounded strangely flat, or sometimes nothing at all. Just a note left on the door with payment waiting. Those who survived strange encounters often report the same detail, the silence inside the house. The feeling that the walls themselves were listening. The overwhelming impression that they had crossed into a space that did not belong to them and never wanted them to leave. The historical context deepens when you examine the darker side of human nature. Predators have always used ordinary rituals to lure their victims. In earlier centuries, travelers were welcomed into inns where they never awoke. In rural towns, door-to-door salesmen knocked on doors that became their graves. The act of offering food, of inviting someone inside, has long been an opening for violence. Delivery, with its false sense of routine and trust, is simply the modern version of this timeless trap. What is most disturbing is how quickly fear spreads once such incidents occur. When a driver does not come home, families grow restless. When police find an abandoned car by a house that looks normal, neighbors stop answering knocks after dark. Restaurants whisper of certain neighborhoods they no longer serve. The communities fall under a quiet cloud and every door becomes suspect. Because once the illusion of safety breaks, every knock, every delivery, every ordinary ritual becomes charged with dread. Even the workers themselves speak of a slow erosion of trust. They describe the feeling of being pulled into places they cannot understand. They drive to an address, headlights cutting through empty fields only to find the house unlit, waiting like a hollow shell. They step onto porches where insects are the only sound. And in the silence, they wonder if someone watches them from behind the curtains. Some describe moments when they nearly turned back, when something in their gut screamed not to knock, not to step closer. Those who ignored that feeling often became names printed on missing posters. And so, communities carry these stories like scars. They remind each other not to order too late, not to send drivers too far, not to trust addresses that feel unfamiliar. Yet the cycle continues because hunger is eternal, convenience is addictive, and darkness always finds its way back. These quiet reminders form the emotional soil in which the more chilling tales of food delivery take root. They show how something designed to bring comfort can instead become a doorway to terror. It is not only the fear of strangers that makes these stories so haunting, it is the betrayal of trust. To open a door for food is to invite a stranger into the fragile circle of home, the place most sacred and private. When that trust is shattered, when the routine becomes deadly, it poisons not only the victim but the community that survives them. It lingers in the way people glance nervously at headlights outside, in the way they hesitate before answering the next knock. This is the world in which these stories exist. A world where ordinary exchanges turn into tragedy. A world where silence hides behind walls that should feel safe. A world where food delivery is not just service but risk. And it is in this shadowed world that the darkest stories begin. The first signs that something was wrong did not come in the form of screams, or broken doors, or frantic phone calls. They came in silence. Deliveries that were logged but never completed. Cars idling by curbs long after the food should have been dropped off. Orders placed from homes that no one seemed to live in. And then came the families, the ones who waited for their sons, daughters, fathers, or mothers to return from a simple late-night shift, only to stare at empty driveways and phones that rang endlessly into nothing. It began slowly, scattered across towns and cities. One driver disappeared in a quiet rural county, last seen carrying a paper bag of food toward a narrow porch. Weeks later, another went missing in an entirely different state, the only evidence a half-eaten meal still resting on the steps of a house deep in the woods. Police reports mentioned possible foul play but rarely offered more detail. For the families, the phrase meant nothing but despair. The questions grew louder. How could so many vanish while doing something so ordinary? How could no one see what really happened? Patterns began to form in whispers before they appeared in writing. Some deliveries were placed to addresses that matched no property records. The homes looked real, the porches solid beneath a driver's feet, the windows glowing with warm light. Yet when investigators returned, those same houses seemed abandoned, the walls crumbling, the windows black. Neighbors swore no one had lived there for years. And yet delivery receipts, digital logs, and GPS trails told another story. Something had been there. Someone had placed the order. Drivers who survived strange encounters carried memories they could never shake. One man recalled pulling up to a house where every light was on, yet no voice ever answered when he knocked. He swore the curtains shifted as though someone was watching him from inside. He left the food on the porch and walked quickly back to his car. But as he drove away, the rearview mirror caught a figure standing in the doorway, tall, unmoving, face obscured by shadow. He told his manager he would never deliver to that part of town again. The restaurant quietly removed the address from its delivery list. Other details began to surface, each one more unsettling than the last. Some drivers reported hearing voices from within houses that appeared empty. Others claimed they smelled something foul, something like rot or damp earth when doors opened. A few swore they felt the sensation of being followed back to their cars, though when they turned around the porch was empty, the doorway dark. One driver confessed to hearing footsteps behind him in the driveway, only to find his own car door already unlocked, as if someone had been waiting inside. Customers, too, became part of the mystery. There were accounts of individuals who placed orders and then were never seen again. Neighbors claimed they watched them answer the door, take the food, and step back into their homes, only for those homes to remain dark and silent the following day. Police would find no trace of them. The food, often untouched, sat on tables or counters as though they had vanished in mid-bite. Families insisted their loved ones had not intended to leave, yet something had taken them, and the last known moment of contact was always the same: the arrival of food at the door. The contradictions were endless. Some houses where deliveries were made appeared normal one day and abandoned the next. Logs showed orders being placed from phones disconnected years earlier. In certain cases, food was delivered to houses that residents swore had burned down long ago. And yet the driver's records did not lie. The orders were real. The locations were precise. But the people tied to them were shadows that disappeared upon closer inspection. Fear began to settle over entire communities. Restaurants lost workers who refused to drive at night. Families forbade their children from ordering after dark. Neighbors looked out their windows at the glow of porch lights and wondered if the next knock would be the one that turned routine into tragedy. The paranoia grew, heavy and suffocating, feeding on each unexplained event. People asked questions in hushed tones, afraid that speaking too loudly might invite attention from whatever lingered in those houses. The most unnerving aspect of all was how quickly the events vanished from public record. Newspapers ran short articles: delivery worker missing, police investigate suspicious address. But the stories died within days. The headlines moved on, leaving only grief for the families and a hollow silence in the towns. It was as though no one wanted to dwell too long on the possibility that something so common, so harmless, could conceal such darkness. The lack of answers created space for imagination, and in that space horror grew. There is a unique kind of terror in the ordinary, and these stories fed that terror like fire consumes dry wood. Food delivery is built on a fragile trust, a stranger carrying sustenance to your door. But what happens when that trust shatters? When the knock at the door signals not comfort but loss? Communities began to wonder if the deliveries themselves were lures, if someone or something was using the ritual to draw victims in. And if that was true, then the safety of every home, every street, every porch light became an illusion. As the cases accumulated, the mystery deepened. Who or what was placing these orders? Why did the houses appear alive one night and hollow the next? Why did drivers vanish without a trace, leaving only their cars and cold food behind? And perhaps most haunting of all, why did the silence of those houses feel so heavy, so deliberate, as though the walls themselves were listening? The buildup left questions dangling like threads in the dark, and the further one pulls at them, the deeper the story goes. The fragments of truth that exist within these stories are scattered, fragile, and often contradictory. Yet when gathered together, they form a pattern too disturbing to ignore. What emerges is not a single event, but a string of moments, records, testimonies, forgotten reports that seem to describe the same darkness repeating itself in different towns under different names, but with the same silent precision. One of the earliest pieces of evidence lies within delivery logs obtained from a small restaurant in the Midwest. The order appeared normal: 2 meals requested at an address along a quiet stretch of road. The driver confirmed pickup and texted the customer en route, but the last signal from his phone placed him at a property that police insisted had been abandoned for decades. The house was there, weathered but standing, yet no one answered the door. The food was recovered later, still in its bag, resting at the edge of the porch. The driver was never found. In another case, the delivery bag itself became the clue. A family searching for their missing daughter uncovered the insulated carrier deep within a wooded ravine. It was torn open, though the contents had not been touched. Strangely, the zipper had been forced from the inside out, as though something had clawed its way free. No footprints were found nearby, not even the girl's own. The ravine was silent, save for the echo of water running through stone. To this day, no one understands how the bag traveled so far from the road, or why the girl's car remained parked just a few hundred yards away with the keys still inside. Witness testimonies are equally unsettling. A neighbor in one town told investigators she saw a driver step onto the porch of a small home late at night. She recognized the uniform, the bag clutched in his hand. She watched him knock. She swore she saw the door open, but then she blinked and the porch was empty. Both driver and food were gone. The neighbor insisted the scene unfolded in less than a minute, as if the man had been erased between breaths. When officers questioned her further, she faltered, admitting that she was no longer sure if the door had truly opened at all. Other witnesses described voices. Drivers arriving at certain houses claimed to hear faint whispers from within, though no figure ever appeared. One man said the voices repeated his name, drawing him forward with unnatural familiarity. He left the food quickly and ran back to his car, shaking too badly to drive. Weeks later, another driver vanished after stopping at the same house. When police entered, the rooms were empty, the walls bare. But neighbors insisted they heard voices in the night for days afterward, soft, rhythmic, like chanting. Experts who reviewed these accounts offered competing theories. Psychologists suggested the drivers may have been vulnerable to paranoia, their exhaustion amplifying ordinary shadows into something sinister. Criminal investigators argued that the disappearances bore the mark of human predators, carefully staged lures designed to target those who worked alone at night. Yet even these explanations falter against the evidence. How does one explain an order placed from a number disconnected years before? How does one explain a house that exists one night and seems to vanish into ruin the next? There is also the matter of the recordings. A handful of phones recovered from missing drivers held audio files that remain unexplained. One recording captures the sound of footsteps crunching on gravel, followed by a knock, then silence. After several minutes, a faint scraping sound rises like nails against wood. The driver breathes heavily, whispering something under his breath before the recording cuts off with a sudden, violent crack. Another phone revealed a video fragment, the porch light flickering, the bag of food visible in the frame, and a dark figure moving past the edge of the camera. The figure appears too tall, its proportions distorted, though the footage is grainy. When enhanced, the image shows what could be an arm, or perhaps something less human. Even in the cases where no supernatural details appear, the human element is no less chilling. Police found that many of the orders were placed using disposable accounts, paid in cash with no way to trace the individual behind them. The addresses often led to properties that were either foreclosed or never existed in official records. It was as though someone had learned how to exploit the delivery system to draw victims into places where no one could help them. And yet, despite these patterns, arrests were rare, convictions non-existent. The trail always grew cold. The contradictions are what keep these stories alive. A delivery driver swears he saw lights on in a house before entering, yet officers later report that the wiring had been cut for years. A customer insists food was delivered by a man in uniform, yet the restaurant confirms no driver had been dispatched that night. A family hears a knock at their door and finds food waiting, still warm, though they had not placed any order. And in each case, when investigators attempt to untangle the details, they are met with silence. Silence from the houses, silence from the witnesses, silence from the missing. Clues exist, scattered like fragments of broken glass, but they refuse to fit together. They leave gaps wide enough for fear to slip through. Every theory, every testimony, every object recovered adds another layer to the mystery rather than resolving it. And so the question deepens: is this the work of human hands, cruel and methodical? Or is it something else? Something that waits in the darkened spaces between trust and fear, between hunger and survival. The deeper one looks into the evidence, the more it begins to feel like the houses themselves are part of the story. They are not backdrops. They are actors. They shift between states of presence and absence, between light and ruin, as if feeding on the rituals that bring strangers to their doors. Each knock, each exchange, each delivery becomes a thread in a pattern too vast to comprehend. And those who have stared too long into the silence of these homes often describe the same sensation, that the walls were listening, that the air itself seemed to lean closer, waiting. This is what the clues reveal: a tapestry woven from fragments of fear, half-glimpsed truths and unanswered questions. The evidence does not explain the mystery. It sharpens it. It reminds us that horror does not always scream in the night. Sometimes it lingers in the quiet, in the sound of a knock, in the hollow of a doorway, waiting for the next hand to deliver something warm into the cold. The true terror of these stories does not rest only in the mystery of vanished drivers or the unanswered questions about who or what lurks behind the doors. The deeper horror lies in what remains behind, in the families left waiting, in the communities hollowed out by paranoia, in the quiet emotional collapse that follows when a routine act of survival turns into an endless absence. It is in the human aftermath that the weight of this darkness is most deeply felt. For the families, every evening becomes a ritual of grief. They replay the final words exchanged, the last message sent before the shift began. A mother recalls her son leaving with a smile, promising he would be back before dawn. Hours later, when the car never returned, she sat in the silence of her kitchen, dialing his phone again and again, listening to the unanswered rings stretch into eternity. Each call became a dagger. Each hour became an ocean. The helplessness crushed her, because there was no crime scene she could hold, no answer she could demand, only a void shaped like the person she loved. Communities feel the ripple of each disappearance in subtle ways. Children notice their parents locking the doors earlier. Strangers on the street seem less trustworthy. In some neighborhoods, porch lights burn all night as a silent ward against the unknown. Restaurants lose workers who refuse to deliver after dark, and those who stay whisper about the danger, their words trembling but unavoidable. It is not just the missing who are claimed. It is the ordinary rhythm of life that fractures. The fear spreads into the simplest rituals. People hesitate to order food after sunset. The knock at the door, once met with casual relief, becomes a moment of hesitation, a pause before stepping forward. Some describe the sensation of dread when the bag of food rests in their hands, as if it carries not warmth but a shadow. Every bite becomes an act of defiance against a fear that has seeped into the most basic act of eating. The very concept of comfort food is poisoned. The survivors, the few who returned from close encounters, speak of emotional scars that do not heal. One man who fled a silent house swore that he still wakes at night with the sound of footsteps echoing behind him, though his bedroom floor is empty. Another woman, who nearly stepped inside a doorway before fleeing in terror, says she cannot look at a front porch without feeling her skin crawl. These people are not only haunted by memory, but by the lingering question of why they survived when others did not. Survivors' guilt coils around them like a shadow, whispering that they escaped by chance and chance cannot be trusted forever. For the relatives of the vanished, grief is a cycle with no conclusion. Traditional mourning offers closure, a body buried, a funeral held, a goodbye whispered. But here there is no grave to visit, no ritual to mark the end. The absence is eternal, and in that absence the mind plays cruel tricks. Families imagine scenarios again and again, constructing stories to fill the silence. Some picture violent ends and weep. Others cling to impossible hopes, imagining their loved ones alive somewhere, trapped but breathing. This hope burns as painfully as despair, because it feeds the wound instead of closing it. The psychological toll extends beyond individuals into the collective heart of the community. When enough vanish, the very identity of a place begins to erode. Residents stop trusting one another. Neighbors who once shared meals and laughter across fences retreat into themselves. Strangers are viewed with suspicion. Delivery drivers, once greeted with casual kindness, are met with wary stares, as though their very presence recalls the shadow that stole so many before. Fear becomes the unspoken law of the streets, and under that law, silence grows. What makes the emotional impact unbearable is how ordinary the initial act always is. A knock at the door, a meal waiting, a drive through familiar streets. These are not extraordinary risks, but everyday routines, woven into the fabric of normal life. When such rituals become dangerous, everything feels contaminated. People cannot separate the horror from the ordinary, and so the dread seeps into every moment, into every door opened, every road traveled, every meal shared. Some families describe the strange feeling that their homes are no longer safe. The door, once a barrier against the world, becomes a reminder of the night it betrayed them. The lock clicks shut louder. The windows feel thinner. The house that was meant to shelter now feels fragile, a structure too weak to hold back what waits outside. It is a quiet unraveling, the slow collapse of trust in the most sacred spaces. Psychologists who have studied these communities speak of collective trauma. They describe patterns of paranoia, insomnia, and anxiety spreading like a contagion. People report shadows that are not there, footsteps outside their windows, whispers through walls. The rational mind tells them nothing is there, but fear overrides reason. In the absence of truth, imagination becomes a predator of its own, replaying horrors that may not exist but feel as real as anything touched or seen. And yet, within the despair, a more terrifying truth emerges. People begin to adapt. They normalize the fear. They adjust to living in suspicion, to avoiding the late-night knock, to warning their children never to trust too quickly. Horror embeds itself into routine, and soon it feels less like an interruption and more like the background noise of life. What was once shocking becomes expected, and that acceptance is perhaps the cruelest wound of all, because it means the darkness has won not only bodies but minds. The psychological scars stretch beyond generations. Children who grew up in these towns inherit the silence, the warnings, the restless glances at doors. They carry memories that are not their own but still shape them. Stories told in hushed tones at dinner tables about the uncle who vanished or the neighbor who never returned. For them, the fear is not a passing rumor. It is an inheritance, a weight carried quietly into adulthood. In the end, the emotional impact of these disappearances is not measured only in the missing, but in the way entire lives shift beneath the weight of dread. It is in the sleepless nights of mothers who wait for footsteps that never return. It is in the hesitation before opening a door. It is in the hollow silence that fills homes when laughter fades into grief. And it is in the quiet acknowledgement spoken only in whispers that something ordinary has been poisoned forever. When ordinary explanations collapse, people turn to theories. They search for patterns in the dark, weaving together pieces of testimony, fragments of evidence, and whispers of rumor in the hope that some thread will lead to clarity. Yet the more investigators and communities searched, the more the story fractured into contradictions. Each possibility felt convincing, yet each carried its own shadow. What remains is not resolution but a tangle of theories, each more unsettling than the last. The most rational explanations point to human predators. Police in multiple counties concluded that certain disappearances bore the marks of calculated crimes. They argued that abandoned houses were perfect traps, addresses listed but empty, properties left unchecked, places where screams would carry no further than the woods. The food order was nothing more than bait. The driver, walking unknowingly into the jaws of the trap, was subdued and silenced before anyone could hear. In this theory, the predator was not supernatural but patient, clever, and merciless. To many, this explanation is almost comforting, because it fits into the realm of human cruelty, a horror that, while terrible, at least belongs to this world. But there are details this theory cannot hold. How does one explain orders placed from disconnected numbers? How does one explain the neighbors who swear they watched drivers vanish before their eyes, stepping onto porches that seem to swallow them whole? And why do so many of the houses themselves shift between states, lit and alive one night, hollow shells the next? If this was the work of criminals, why leave behind such impossible contradictions? Others turned to theories of organized crime. Some investigators speculated that delivery services were being exploited for trafficking, both of drugs and of people. Orders, they suggested, were merely signals, coded requests to lure drivers to specific locations where transactions occurred or victims were taken. Yet again, the evidence bends awkwardly. The lack of ransom demands, the absence of financial trails, and the sheer randomness of the addresses undercut this explanation. No syndicate would leave such chaos in its wake without purpose. Paranormal theories filled the void left by unsatisfying logic. Folklorists noted that stories of vanishing houses and doorway disappearances echo across cultures. In some traditions, it is said that certain thresholds are cursed, doorways that open not into homes but into other realms. To step across them is to step out of the human world entirely. In this interpretation, the food deliveries are not the cause but the coincidence, an ancient hunger drawing modern rituals into its orbit. The warm bag of food becomes an offering, a replacement for sacrifices once demanded by older, darker beliefs. Others whisper of the houses themselves as entities, not places but predators. They feed on the trust of the knock, the vulnerability of the driver stepping closer. The light in the window is bait. The silence inside is the lure. When the door creaks open, it is not wood that moves, but something deeper, hungrier, ancient. Those who disappear are not killed in any ordinary sense. They are consumed, absorbed into the hollow walls, lost within spaces that shift and breathe. It is a theory impossible to prove, yet disturbingly consistent with the testimonies of those who survived, who insist the air itself leaned closer, listening, waiting. Psychological explanations attempt to root the events in the fragility of human perception. Long hours, exhaustion, isolation. These are the ingredients of hallucination, paranoia, and fractured memory. Perhaps, experts argue, the drivers who vanished did so by accident, wandering off roads, disoriented, or fleeing imagined threats into danger. Survivors, too, may have misremembered details, their minds reshaping events into something more sinister than reality. But even here, contradictions remain. Hallucinations cannot erase cars, cannot fake audio recordings, cannot explain why certain addresses continue to receive deliveries despite being abandoned for decades. Conspiracy theorists, less bound by reason, point higher. They claim that delivery services themselves know more than they admit, that data logs and call records are quietly erased to cover patterns no one should see. Some insist the government hides evidence, aware that something unexplainable hunts within the delivery system, but unwilling to spread panic. A handful even whisper that the orders are not placed by humans at all, that the technology itself has become infected, manipulated by forces unknown, generating orders that draw victims into traps not built by human hands. No single investigation has ever reached closure. Police files grow dusty with unresolved cases. Families are told that no further leads are available. Communities are left with fragments that suggest much but confirm nothing. And perhaps that is the most chilling element. The machinery of truth grinds to a halt in the face of these stories. Institutions that should bring clarity instead bring silence. Among those who have studied the cases longest, one conclusion rises again and again. It is not the disappearance itself that haunts most deeply, but the way the disappearances blur the line between ordinary and impossible. If a driver is killed by a criminal, the crime has motive. If a driver vanishes into thin air, logic bends. And in that bending lies terror, because once the boundary between normal life and impossible horror breaks, it cannot be repaired. So the theories remain, each as likely and unlikely as the next. Human predators hiding in the shell of abandoned houses, organized networks preying on routine, ancient thresholds devouring the unwary, cursed houses that breathe and feed, or perhaps nothing at all but the cruel failures of memory and chance. Yet none of these answers settle the silence, and the silence is what lingers longest. The investigations may close, the files may fade, but the knock at the door remains. And each time a driver steps out of their car, clutching a warm bag of food in the darkness, the same question breathes through the night. Will this delivery end with a simple exchange? Or will it end in silence, leaving another family staring at an empty chair? In the end, these stories remain unsolved, not because people failed to search, but because the answers were never meant to be found. Some truths live only in silence. Some patterns refuse to be mapped. And what lingers after the headlines fade, after the police close their files, after families are left with nothing but photographs and fading hope, is a question that gnaws at the mind. How safe can anything ordinary ever be? The knock at the door is one of the oldest sounds in human life. It is a request for entry, a gesture of trust, a bridge between stranger and home. We answer it without thinking. A friend, a neighbor, a delivery, everyday life depends on that ritual. Yet it is precisely because it is so familiar that it can be twisted into something horrifying. When the knock itself becomes a threat, safety is destroyed at its foundation. The tragedy of these food delivery stories is not only in the loss of lives, but in the betrayal of trust. People step forward believing they are opening a door to warmth, to nourishment, to something harmless. What they meet instead is silence, or worse, a void that swallows them whole. The very ritual of eating, the act that sustains life, becomes poisoned. The bag of food, still warm in its container, sits abandoned in the cold while the person who carried it vanishes into nothing. It is an image too cruel to forget. Communities carry these stories like ghosts in their veins. Even after years pass, the shadows remain. A house that once glowed with lights but now sits abandoned still draws glances from passing cars. A delivery receipt framed in a grieving mother's home becomes an object of mourning, the last trace of her child's routine. Neighbors remember the flicker of a porch light, the silence of a driveway where a car idled too long. These fragments form an inheritance of dread, passed down in whispers, shaping how entire generations view the simple act of answering a door. The most terrifying part is how easily it could happen again. Every night across countless towns and cities, drivers step into the dark with nothing but a bag of food and a hope to return home. Every night, customers unlock their doors, trusting the figure who waits on the other side. Most will be safe. Most will forget the exchange by morning. But in the back of the mind lingers the possibility that the next delivery could be different, that the ritual could twist, that the ordinary could collapse. And once you let that thought in, it never truly leaves. It is tempting to search for closure, to demand answers. People want to know who placed the orders, what waited in the houses, why the drivers never returned. Yet closure is denied, and the denial is its own form of horror. Perhaps the predators were human. Perhaps the houses were traps. Perhaps something older and nameless still waits behind thresholds that glow faintly in the night. Each theory feels plausible until the silence swallows it whole. The truth, if it exists, remains hidden behind doors that no one should ever open. There is a deeper lesson buried in these stories, though it offers no comfort. Horror thrives in routine. It hides in the moments when you least expect it. When you are tired, hungry, distracted, living without caution because life demands it. That is why these tales strike so deeply. They do not belong to the distant past or foreign places. They belong to the streets outside your own window, the knocks at your own door, the warm bag of food you may be waiting for right now. Imagine, for a moment, that the next knock comes while you are alone at home. The hallway is dim. The porch light flickers faintly. You expect nothing more than the meal you ordered, the smell of comfort to fill your kitchen. You unlock the door, open it slowly, and see the figure waiting in the shadows. The bag rests in their hands, but their face does not move, their eyes do not blink. The silence stretches. You reach forward, and in that breathless instant, you cannot be sure if you are inviting sustenance into your life, or something that will consume you instead. This is why these stories never fade. They haunt because they are unfinished. They linger because they could belong to anyone. The boundary between the safe and the unsafe is no longer clear. It blurs at the doorway in the exchange of food, in the trust of strangers. And when that boundary dissolves, so does the illusion of safety we cling to so desperately. So the next time your doorbell rings, the next time a knock echoes in the silence of your home, pause for a moment longer than usual. Listen to the stillness. Glance at the shadows. Ask yourself, do you truly know who is on the other side? Do you truly know where the food came from? Do you truly know if the door you are opening leads to the comfort of life or the silence of disappearance? The answer will not come. It is not meant to. And perhaps that is the point. Some stories remain unsolved not because they cannot be explained, but because the fear lies in never knowing.